Imagine this, two groups of students, Group 1 and Group 2, and you are in Group 2. I gave Group 1 a scientific passage to read only once. For Group 2, the group you belong to, I give the same piece of text to read. But for your group, I introduce a slight change. I allow you to read immediately a second time. When you're done reading your group twice and the first group once, I ask you questions about what you just read. And as you might expect, you and your group answers are slightly better than the answers of students in Group 1. That's Monday. The next day, on Tuesday, I call you back in groups and ask you questions about the test you read on Monday. That's when I notice something strange happening. Your answers, as well as those of your friends in Group 2, are no longer better than the answers of students in Group 1. The advantage of reading just disappeared in one day. Now, why is that? The answer to this question has to do with what I see as the most important fundamental principle of learning. And by the way, what I just described is a real scientific experiment. The references are in the one-page PDF summary of this video, linked in the description. The day before recording this video, I was in a university department. A charming young lady, a senior undergrad student, was at the front desk studying. I started the conversation and we talked for a bit, and I learned that she was reviewing her anatomy class. She had a PowerPoint presentation in front of her, probably one given class, and was summarizing the material while looking at it in a large notebook. So she was summarizing it in a large notebook. That was her way of revising, of learning the material. To me, however, this was a complete waste of time. Of course, I didn't tell her that, but without a doubt, she wasn't really learning. Maybe she was preparing to learn, but that was not necessary. Yet, with just a tiny change in her approach, her study time could have become infinitely more valuable. A change that once again relates to what I believe is the most fundamental principle of all learning. Most students, most learners read to learn. Like that young woman, maybe you summarize your notes while looking at the study material, or maybe you use highlighters to mark important ideas. Or perhaps you write down new words from a new language you're learning in a notebook. Research and my own exploration suggests, however, that all these approaches are at best inefficient. For the past 4 years, the science of learning has literally haunted me. My obsession started when I read the book Make It Stick: The Science of Successful Learning. I've realized that learning how we learn can significantly accelerate progress in all areas of life. Speaking multiple languages, learn how to play instrument faster, excel academically and professionally. Do more because you get, guess what? Free time from your new learning strategies. I truly believe that learning how to learn helps achieve a sense of intellectual fulfillment that plays a big role for most of us in life fulfillment. My reading notes and personal explorations so far have led me to structure this knowledge into a series of 8 videos, this one being the first. Now, although I'll get back to that in another video of the series, let's clarify one thing. It's a fact that intellectual talent is not evenly distributed among people. It follows a normal distribution. I'll return to this in another video. This means that your ability to absorb and manipulate abstract information is partly influenced by genetics. That said, I've read, experienced, and observed again and again that we have a huge margin for improvement in our ability to absorb knowledge, especially in the long run. And learning is a long-term game. In fact, it's possible that with a rigorous approach to learning, People who do not know what you're doing will assume you're naturally gifted. And I personally hold that when an adult seems deeply intelligent, it's always more about what they do than what they were born with. Again, I'll explore this in another video of the series. Now, let's get started. The most effective learning methods share two key characteristics. They are counterintuitive, meaning that when you use them, they may not feel like they're working unless you're patient enough to see the results over time. And second, they require effort. Often a lot of effort. Keep these two principles in mind throughout the series, counterintuitive and effortful. To truly understand how we learn, let's first observe how we forget. In the late 19th century, a psychologist considered the father of experimental psychology, Hermann Ebbinghaus, spent his days memorizing meaningless syllables like K-A-K, C-U-C, what we call trigrams. By varying how he learned these nonsense syllables, he eventually discovered a law describing the gradual decline of retained information over time. When he plotted this retention over time, he created what is now famously known as the forgetting curve. Yes, this experiment has been replicated multiple times and the pattern holds. After learning something, the brain forgets about half of it within 20 minutes and around 60 to 70% after an hour, and that continues to decline, though at a slower rate. For example, you may have already forgotten the name of the scientist who first mapped the forgetting curve. That's just the less exciting part of the story. The real breakthrough came later. Building on Ebbinghaus' work, other researchers, including the authors of Make It Stick, the book that I've read, discovered that retrieving information not only resets the forgetting curve, but also flattens it. Not rereading information, but actively recalling it, making the effort to produce the information ourselves dramatically strengthens retention. I think this is worth saying again. Recalling information not only resets the forgetting curve, but also flattens it. Flattening the forgetting curve means that you no longer forget 50% after 20 minutes. Instead, if you test yourself immediately after learning, you might forget only 30% after 2 days. The decline is drastically less sharp. Testing yourself is the key. In other words, once you understand what you're reading, stop rereading. Just ask yourself what you just read, or close your notes and try writing it down from memory, or better yet, do both. For example, someone making summaries with PowerPoint could read and understand a few slides, 1, 2, 3, then close them and recreate the summary from memory. When someone tells you the name, repeat it back to them immediately. Don't just ask them to repeat it. Aristotle understood this well when he wrote on memory like 300 years before Christ. The repeated act of recollection strengthens memory. Now let's look at this example. 1978. Scientists tell a story to a group of participants, clearly mentioning 60 objects throughout the story. After they split the group into two. The first group is tested immediately on their memory on the objects and recall on average 53%, a little bit over half. And that kind of follows the pattern that after 20 minutes we've forgotten about half of the knowledge we've just learned. The second group, however, is not tested right away. 1 week later, both groups take the test. The first group, the one who had the immediate test, remembers about 40% of the objects, while the second group recalls only 28%. This means that after a week, the first group still remembers about 7 more objects than the second. This is the biggest breakthrough of the science of learning, testing in rapid forgetting. Another example, in 2005, the authors of the book and other scientists take a bolder approach. They reach out to a middle school in Colombia to test their ideas. The principal is hesitant, but a 6th grade teacher agrees to give it a try. The principal sets strict conditions: no changes to the curriculum, no new textbooks, absolutely no modifications to the lessons. The only difference? Quizzes that do not count toward grades. And here's how it works. At the start and end of each class, the teacher leaves the room so that they have no idea which questions are asked. A researcher then projects a short multiple quiz question on the board and reads the questions out loud. Each student selects the answer. To make sure any effects aren't due to reading or repeated exposure, the researcher include some concept where they simply read facts aloud for the students without testing them. The experiment runs the entire year, and remember, the quizzes do not affect student grades, and the teacher has zero idea which topics are being tested when they create the final exam or even when they explain things in class. When the year ends and students take the final exams, the results are just striking. On topics that appeared in the quizzes, students score an average of A-. But for concepts that were only reviewed repeatedly without being tested, the scores are no better than for topics that weren't even covered in the quiz at all. Being tested helps students retain information. Simply reading does not. In other words, if after a class or watching a YouTube video that you're particularly interested in, you take 5 minutes to write down what you heard or watched without looking at your notes or at the recording or at the video, you will retain the material better than someone who didn't do this. Or even someone who spent a lot of time rereading again or rewatching the material. Similarly, if you simply read your notes, your retention won't be much different from someone who did basically nothing. As the rest of the series will show, the real benefit comes from the mental work required to search for the solution. And that's what strengthens memory pathways. Now, as the saying goes, the devil is in the details. How you apply this testing strategy makes all the difference. The second video of the series will dive into key approaches, spacing, interleaving, and variation. At the end of this video, you probably feel like you've understood everything well. How can you be sure? Test yourself without looking at the screen. Go ahead, I'll wait. You're probably trying to recall what you just learned, and you might feel a bit uncomfortable. That's completely normal. In fact, it's the most important part, the effort of recall. If you never experienced that slight discomfort while learning, then you're not really learning. The illustration from this video is available for download in the description box along with a PDF summary of the key points. You'll also find references to scientific studies mentioned in this video.